Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another lesson in our web design series. And right now we're going through different CSS properties. In the last lecture, we introduced something called the display property, and we showed the differences between the inline, the block, and then the inline block displays. Now in this lecture, we're going to introduce another value for the display property called flex. So if I open this up, and if I just write Flexbox instead of document for the title here. And I'm going to go ahead and link a CSS file. So link CSS and then style.css. I have that file over here, so that is not a problem. And then inside of here, I'm going to make one div, and then inside of that div, I'm going to put 4 additional divs. So I'm just going to say dot outer, and then inside of here, I'm going to say dot inner asterisk 4. And now I'm going to write on every line here, box, or we'll just call it div, and then 1, 2, 3, 4. And now if I go ahead and save this, you can see I've got div 1, 2, 3, 4, but I can't really tell where any of the boundaries are. I'm going to give some styles to all of my divs here. So I'm going to say border, we'll do 2 pixels, solid black. And I'm going to give that a little bit of padding and margin as well. So, whoops, padding, I'm going to say 4 pixels, and then margin, we'll also say 4 pixels. And I'm going to give just a little bit of height to my outer div as well. So dot outer, and we can say height and maybe 60 viewport height, which is going to be 60% of the viewport height. So now if I go ahead and save that, you could see I've got all of these 4 different divs, and they're very clearly showing up as block elements. So what I can do down here, inside of my inner class, I'm going to go ahead and give these a fixed height and width. So I can say height is going to be maybe 100 pixels, and then width is also going to be 100 pixels, so that these all look like boxes. And maybe let's go a little bit higher on the viewport height, maybe 70% viewport height. There we go. Now let's give the outer box a background color. So background color of maybe light coral, and then the inner boxes will also give a background color, and I can say maybe, I don't care, aquamarine, doesn't matter. And there we go. We've got this nice and ugly color scheme, but that's not the point. Now you see we have these 4 boxes, and they are aligned vertically in a column. And again, that's because they're block elements, which means by default they're going to be, each one is going to be on a different line. And in the previous video, we talked about the display property. So if I come up here to my outer div, and if I want to set our display property to something different, if I go ahead and change this to flex, and then hit save, you'll see now everything appears in a row at the top on the same line. So they look kind of like it did when we did these as inline block elements, but there's a big difference here, and I'll go ahead and show that to you. One, we can go ahead and arrange our flex in any direction that we want. So we have our flex direction, and you can say it's in a row right now by default. So if I set that to row, nothing's going to change. But I can also set that to column. And if I were to save that, now it's going just like it was before with our block element. Or I could set that to column reverse, which you can see now it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now if I set it to column reverse, it's going to start at number 4. And now we have 4, 3, 2, 1. And you'll also notice that our alignment has jumped to the bottom when I did that. And you also have row reverse in here. So you can set that to whatever direction you want. I'm going to go ahead and just set it back to row, which again is the default. So technically you don't need that line. And then in here, we've got a couple other interesting properties that we're going to go ahead and look at. First of all, we have our justify. So I can say justify content. And justify content is going to align our items or justify our items horizontally. So if I come in here and say center, you can see it all moves to the middle of the screen, or the middle of the outer div rather. If I say end, now it moves to the end, but there's a couple other options here. You also have space around, space between, and space evenly. So I'll show you what all of these do. First, we'll start with the space between. And you can see here, space between, I have an equal space in between every single box, but around the edges, I have no space at all. Technically, if you zoom in, you've got 8 pixels there, but that is only because we have 4 pixels of padding and 4 pixels of margin. I guess that would actually be 60. Yeah, well, whatever it is, we've got some padding and margin there, and we don't need to worry about that right now. If I were to actually go ahead and just comment those out right now, you could see the space is all totally in between the boxes. There's no space around the edges. Now if I come down here, instead of saying space between, if I say space around and hit save, you could see we've got an equal length in between all the boxes, and then on the outside, we have just half of that. So what it's doing is it's putting an equal space in between all, and at the start and finish, it's putting just half of that, so that the start gap and the finish gap are going to equal one complete gap. It's going to equal the same as one complete gap in between the items. And then finally, we have the space evenly. And if I do that, it's now going to space them with an even gap starting at the beginning and then all throughout the middle and the end. Everything's going to be even there. So let me go ahead and put our padding back in just so that looks a little bit better. That's how you align things or justify your content horizontally. Now, if you want to align it vertically, we can do align items. And again, here you've got center, end, and start, a whole bunch of different things. So now if I hit center, you can see it jumps to the middle. And now if I do start, you can see it's going to jump to the start and then end. You can see it's now at the end of our outside div. And I should also mention while we're here, this end property that we also have something in here called flex end. And the same thing with start. You have start, but then you also have flex start. Now, our flex obviously is going to be our outer div here, because that's where we're changing our display right here in outer. Our display is set to flex on that. So the start of the flex and then the start of this outer div is obviously going to be the same. So this is typically going to actually give us the same result. But while we're working with Flexboxes, it's generally considered a better practice to use flex start and then flex end rather than just start and end, because especially when we're nesting things together, it can be just a little more specific and a little more readable. It just brings a little more clarity to your code later on. So that's how we do the alignment. Justify is going to be for our horizontal arrangement, and then our vertical alignment is going to be done with this align items option inside the Flexbox. There's a couple other interesting properties that we want to look at in here. So let me come back to my index file and just give one of these inner boxes or one of these inner divs a different class name. So I'm going to say div1, and then go ahead and save that. Come back to your style CSS. Now I'm going to add some styles for that new div1 class that we have. And inside of here, if I add this order, and if I set that to maybe anything but 0. So by default, all of the items within your Flexbox are going to have an order of 0, which means they're all at the same level. But if I set that to maybe 1 and save that, you can see now, if I look in here, my div1 jumped all the way to the end. So if I were to come back to my index, maybe let's give the third one a class, and we could say div3. Save that, come back in here, and if we come down here and say div3, and the same thing, if we give this an order, and maybe let's change this to 2, and then change this to 1. Now before I save this, what do you think this order is going to be? Well, I'll tell you. We're going to have our first div, which has an order 2, And then our second div, which has nothing assigned, so by default is going to be 0. Our third div is going to have an order 1. And then finally, our fourth div, again, has nothing assigned, so it's going to be by default 0. So it's going to be 2, 4, and then after that, it's going to go order 1, order 2. So it'll be 2, 4, 3, 1. So now if I save that, you can see our divs are ordered 2, 4, 3, 1. So you can use this order to rearrange things within your Flexbox. So if you've got like, I don't know, like a blog post that you always want to be first or you always want to be last or anything like that, that's what you can use this order field, this order property for. The next thing we need to address in this lecture is going to be the responsiveness of our application. And what I mean by that is how your application is going to behave when it's displayed on different screen sizes. So in the modern world, you're going to want your web application to be displayed and to look good on anything from a very large TV all the way down to maybe something as small as a smartwatch. So with the huge variety of different screen sizes, we want to test our apps to make sure that they're going to look good across the board. And Flexbox is going to, or this Flex display property is going to really help us do that. So to demonstrate this, let's change my display back to block just for a minute, which is what it is by default. And then on my inner class down here, I'm going to change this display also to inline block. Now, if you hit save, you can see we get our, everything is in a row. And if I were to resize this, you can see we kind of shrink as it gets smaller, and eventually they all get just smashed together and it doesn't look good. So what you can do with a Flexbox, if we get rid of that display line again, set those back to default, and then up here, we're going to change this back to Flex. So now what I can do, you could see if I were to resize it now with the Flexbox, as it gets smaller, instead of wrapping onto the next row, they shrink with the screen size. So that's good. But when we get bigger, they just leave a lot of space in between it. Well, what if I wanted them to also grow bigger? We can do that with a Flexbox, and we can come in here and we can say flex. There's this property flex grow, and we can say flex grow, and if I set that equal to 1, that means now they're all going to grow at the same rate. So now, or actually, sorry, we don't want that on the outer. We want that on the inner, because the inner is the item that we want to actually grow. So if I come down here and say flex grow and set that equal to 1, and now save that, now you can see no matter what the screen size, they are going to readjust to that. So I can have them all set to grow like that, or I can, maybe I just want to have one of these growing. I can assign that to an individual, save that now, and as we get bigger, you see actually now only div 1 grows. Or what I can also do, I can have them grow at different rates. So if I come into maybe div 3 and I want div 3 to grow at 1 and I want div 1 to grow at 2, if I save that, well, you can see now both div 3 and div 1 are growing, but div 1 is bigger than div 3 because it's growing at twice the rate. So you can have individual assignments for all of these, or you can have them all be the same. And it's the same thing with shrink. If I were to change this to flex shrink, and we have flex shrink 2 on div 1 and then flex shrink 1 on div 3, save that. Well, now as I get smaller, you can see div 1, and by the way, this flex shrink, the default is 1. So I guess I don't need that line at all, but you see div 2, div 3, and div 4 are all the same size as they're shrinking, and div 1 is half the size because it's shrinking at twice the rate as the other divs. Now, there's one more property I want to look at here. So let's go ahead and just actually delete all of this. We don't need that anymore. And down here, if I save that, you can see they're all in order again, 1, 2, 3, 4. And if I were to expand that, they take their full size. And if I expand it more, they're no longer growing. But if I shrink it, they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Well, sometimes you don't always want that behavior, especially here. You can see now they've reached the minimum size that they're going to be, the minimum width, and now they're overshooting the outside box. So one thing that we can do to fix that is inside our outer box where we have our display set to flex, we can come down here and we can say flex wrap. And now we have the option for no wrap, which is going to be your default, or we can wrap. And now if I save that, you can see instead of shrinking, what's going to happen is as we get smaller, they're each going to go onto their own line. And then we have the same option, well, not the same, we have the opposite option here for instead of wrap, you could say wrap reverse. And if I were to save that, you can see we start at the bottom and we have 1, 2, 3, 4. And as I shrink and get smaller, we're going to wrap up onto the line above it instead of onto the line below it. So these are just all of the different properties that you can use with the flex display property. Make sure to play around with this and practice it and really understand this, because this concept is going to be very, very important as we continue on with CSS and web design, especially when we're talking about how to make websites responsive so that they're going to look good on virtually any size device. So make sure to practice this and really get it down before you move on to the next video. And with that being said, definitely leave a comment down below letting us know what you think, or if you have any questions, and then like and subscribe to our channel, and we will see you in the next video.